America's money is being challenged in plain sight. Yesterday, while most people weren't watching, White House officials sat down with crypto executives and bank lobbyists to break a deadlock over the Clarity Act. On camera, the president said, if we don't do crypto, then China's going to do it. That sounds decisive. But here's the contradiction. The same bill meant to secure America's position is stuck. Not over safety, not over fraud, but over one question. Should crypto platforms be allowed to reward customers for holding stable coins? That matters to you because rewards change behavior. They decide whether your money stays in a bank or moves somewhere else. Banks warn of capital flight. Crypto firms say there's no evidence whatsoever of that risk. And while Washington debates China is already offering yield on a central bank digital currency, this isn't a tech story. It's a contest over demand for the dollar, over deposits, and over who controls the next financial default. And once you see what's really driving this fight, the stakes look very different. What's being framed as a narrow regulatory dispute is actually part of a much larger pattern. The Clarity Act isn't stalled because lawmakers don't understand crypto. It's stalled because two systems are colliding. Traditional banks say allowing rewards on stable coins could pull billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars out of deposits. Crypto platforms say that fear is manufactured, designed to protect incumbents, and both sides showed up at the White House yesterday knowing exactly what's at stake. The president didn't hedge. In the Oval Office, he said, "I'm a big crypto person," and warned again that if the U.S. doesn't act, China will. At the same time, bank associations are pushing limits that would make stable coins look less attractive than savings accounts. That's not a coincidence. It's a power struggle over where money earns yield and who gets to offer it. So here's the reframing question. Is this really about consumer protection, or is it about preventing competition? At the moment, it becomes unavoidable, because once rewards enter the picture, the balance of leverage shifts fast. Here's the claim that cuts through the noise. This fight isn't slowing crypto down. It's exposing fear inside the banking system, and the evidence is hiding in what was said on air. Bank critics argue stablecoin rewards could trigger a massive flight of capital, pulling billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars out of deposits. That sounds catastrophic. But when pressed, no data was offered, no examples, no case study, just the warning itself. In response, Coinbase's chief legal officer said there is no evidence whatsoever that stablecoins draw demand away from community bank deposits. Instead, he pointed to something concrete. Stablecoin reserves are backed dollar for dollar, primarily in short-term U.S. Treasuries. That's not rhetoric. That's a structural detail. And it matters because it directly supports demand for the dollar, not the opposite. Now, notice what's missing from the bank argument. No mention of the over $3 trillion sitting idle at the Federal Reserve. No acknowledgement that rewards already exist elsewhere in the system. The concern isn't instability, it's competition. And once you recognize that, the escalation becomes unavoidable. Once competition enters the system, things accelerate quickly. What started as a technical debate over rewards has turned into a broader confrontation over what's considered normal in finance. For decades, banks operated on a fractional system, lending out deposits while keeping only a portion in reserve. That structure was accepted even after repeated crises. Now compare that to what's being described here. Stablecoins backed dollar for dollar, held mainly in short-term U.S. Treasuries, not relent, not leveraged. Here's where the story echoes an older pattern. Every time a new financial rail threatens to reduce friction or bypass incumbents, the response is the same. First, warnings of chaos, then calls for delay, then demands that the new system be restrained until it resembles the old one. And slowly, something that should be exceptional becomes standard. That's what's happening now. Limits on rewards aren't about safety. They're about preserving a familiar hierarchy. Because once people can earn yield without a traditional bank account, the assumption that deposits are immovable stops being true. And when assumptions break, systems recalibrate fast. That's why this debate is intensifying instead of cooling down. Here's where the contradiction becomes impossible to unsee. On the one hand, critics argue crypto platforms want rewards without responsibility. On the other, the industry is publicly pushing for regulation, not softer rules, clearer ones. Coinbase's legal chief said it directly. The idea that crypto is avoiding oversight is a very strange argument, especially when the industry is pressing Congress to pass the Clarity Act. Then comes the concrete detail that changes how this looks. Under the proposed framework, crypto would face strict supervision at the federal level for the first time. Not loosely, not optionally. Federal oversight, clear jurisdiction between regulators, and defined rules for spot markets. That's not regulatory evasion. That's regulatory exposure. Now compare words to structure. Banks warn about risk while operating a fractional system that introduces all sorts of systemic risks. Stablecoin deposits, by contrast, are described as fully backed and not re-lent into the economy. Different mechanics, different risk profiles, same accusations. Here's the line that reframes everything. The argument isn't that crypto is unsafe. It's that it doesn't need banks to function. Once that reality sinks in, the pressure spikes. Because if the system can work without intermediaries, the old justifications start to collapse. Now the pressure stacks quickly. First, the White House summit itself. Officials convene banks and crypto leaders because the Clarity Act is stuck even as the president openly backs crypto and warns about China. Second, the reminder that keeps getting overlooked. The Genius Act is already law, and under that law, stablecoin rewards are very clear and already allowed. Even if clarity fails, rewards don't disappear. Third, the Senate Agriculture Committee moves its version of the bill forward anyway, signaling momentum from a regulator that would oversee crypto markets. At the same time, crypto executives accuse banks of trying to undermine the president's crypto agenda. That's not speculation. That's how the conflict is being described on air. Layer on the external clock. China is already offering yield on a central bank digital currency with the explicit goal of seeing the yuan displace the dollar. While U.S. lawmakers argue over limits, another system is moving faster. And underneath all of this, Coinbase is openly building what it calls an everything exchange, expanding into stock trading, prediction markets, and direct financial services. That's not waiting. That's preparation. The situation isn't drifting. It's compressing. And when multiple timelines collide, something gives. This is where the story stops being abstract and starts landing in your life. Because when people argue about deposits and rewards, what they're really talking about is your behavior. Where you park your money, how quickly you can move it, whether it earns anything while it sits there. If stablecoins offer yield and banks don't, the decision stops being ideological and becomes practical. Think about how you already live. Your work, your payments, your subscriptions, your savings are moving online. Friction matters. Waiting days for transfers matters. Earning nothing while prices rise matters. And that's why this debate isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening at the exact moment more people are questioning what they get in return for loyalty to traditional institutions. Critics warn rural communities could be left behind. But crypto executives counter that stablecoins could give community banks new ways to engage customers instead of losing them. That's not theory. That's the argument being made right now, live, as legislation hangs in the balance. If this feels familiar, say so in the comments. Because once everyday choices start shifting quietly, systems don't get advance notice. Here's the part that rarely makes it into headlines. Systems don't change because one side wins an argument. They change because incentives realign. Banks are incentivized to protect deposits. Crypto platforms are incentivized to attract them. Lawmakers are incentivized to avoid blame if something breaks. And audiences are incentivized by yield, speed, and access. That's the mechanism driving everything you're seeing. Not ideology, not personality, leverage. When stable coins are backed by U.S. Treasuries, they quietly create demand for dollars while bypassing traditional balance sheets. When rewards are added, that leverage increases. And when regulators hesitate, uncertainty becomes a tool in itself. This is why spectacle matters. Public warnings about massive capital flight shape perception even without evidence. Closed-door summits signal urgency without resolution. And constant references to China keep the pressure external and immediate. Fear in this system isn't a byproduct. It's a currency. The unsettling insight is this: control doesn't disappear. It moves. And whoever controls the rails of money, even indirectly, gains influence without ever needing to announce it. From here, the trajectory splits, but neither path slows down. In one direction, Congress passes the Clarity Act with limits that blunt stablecoin rewards. Banks keep deposits anchored. Crypto grows, but inside a tighter box. The dollar stays dominant, but innovation moves cautiously, step by step, while China keeps testing its digital yuan in live environments, offering yield and speed without hesitation. In the other direction, the bill passes without those limits or stalls long enough for existing law to dominate. Under the Genius Act, rewards continue. Platforms like Coinbase expand their everything exchange vision. Stock trading, prediction markets, direct deposits, all in one place. Not overnight, but steadily. And as more activity shifts, demand for dollars doesn't vanish. It migrates into new rails. Here's the uncertainty nobody can model precisely. Which signal matters more? Legislative restraint or behavioral momentum? Once people get used to earning yield, moving money instantly, and operating outside a single institution, reversing that habit is hard. And sitting outside both paths is a third variable. China isn't waiting for clarity. It's building, offering, iterating. That clock doesn't stop while debates continue. The next move won't be announced with a press release. You'll see it in what quietly becomes normal. Here's the insight that ties the entire story together. This was never a fight about crypto versus banks. It's a fight about defaults. The default place your money sits, the default system that earns from it, the default authority that sets the rules without being questioned. When the president says, if we don't do crypto, China's going to do it, he's not talking about technology. He's talking about momentum. Once a financial system becomes the default, power follows quietly. And once people realize they have alternatives, even imperfect ones, the old default starts to weaken. The Clarity Act may pass, it may stall, but the signal has already been sent. Crypto is no longer fringe, and resistance now looks less like caution and more like delay. The real risk isn't that the dollar disappears, it's that control over how it's used fragments, piece by piece, without a single dramatic moment. That's why this story doesn't end here. The next chapter won't be about a bill, it will be about what people choose when they're given a real option. Follow and subscribe if you want to stay ahead of that shift.